You got it.
Today, I am Bruce Lee. Today, I will be interviewing an amazing lady. Her name is Dan Inosanto. How are you doing today?
I am doing really good, thank you. A little busy and hectic, as you could probably, as I told you before, but I'm good actually.
Thank you so much. I noticed that you're very good with people. I can just tell from that. Because usually people don't notice other people, but thank you so much for that. And you're very jolly too.
I am. I think I probably get that from my dad. Actually, he's a pretty good jolly man. So you know.
Okay. How did you start practicing martial arts?
How did I start practicing martial arts? Well, for me, martial arts is like a second language. It's usually what I tell people. It is, for me, about heritage. It's about culture. And so really, that's how I came to, practice martial arts, because my father always said to me that it's important that you know your ancestry. And so for my father, he started me at a very young age, but he introduced martial arts in a very playful way. And so I was very lucky that he made it so enjoyable at the time that I didn't realize that he was really planting the seeds for me becoming, a martial artist, because he made it all about play, and he made it about, learning the joy of my ancestry and my history. And so he always kind of included it, the history lessons and little stories with each lesson. Okay. Which is kind of untraditional, but it is what was traditional for me.
So basically you're saying you wasn't forced. So oftentimes, like, when, I guess kids, when they, for you're more like, it's fun to do martial arts, right?
It was. Although sometimes we had a couple of, he would have to battle with me when I wanted to play with my Barbie dolls, and he's like, oh my gosh, and I'm like, Dad, I'm having Barbie doll time. Come on, give me a break. And he'd roll his eyes, and, he would wait. And then, of course, we would start again. But, he made it this game. Like, for instance, we could be, I remember we were in this Chinese restaurant, and all of a sudden he would say, what would you do if somebody did this? And he would stick like a butter knife at my side. And so he was trying to teach me how to disarm, but he did it a game. So it was really in these weird environments that normally you wouldn't have a martial arts lesson, yet there was the martial arts lesson right there.
Did you often do like sparring or like any, you said butter, like kind of like, what was it, butter knife?
A butter knife, a cutting knife, a dull blade, never a real blade that could cut. But as far as sparring, actually as a kid, he would have us spar. I mean, of course it was controlled sparring. You don't want to have kids knock each other out. That wouldn't be good, that would be really bad. But he did teach us light sparring. And what he would do, which I think is very smart, is he would say, okay, so on a scale from 1 to 10, you're going to spar at maybe 2, or you're going to rack it up maybe to a 5 or a 9, because it was a way of helping us gauge to what intensity or what level we would spar at. And he still does that today, even. So,
did you learn like because back then I used to take the traditional martial arts, Shaolin, they call it the Hun Foot. Would you do like, the traditional stance, like horse stance or like bow and arrow or dragon stance or the cross stance or cat stance?
He would have us do certain stances in the beginning. And, and it's funny, with each passing decade, I noticed that my father's style of teaching would shift and change. And I think, too, he was evolving as a teacher, because he had to kind of figure out what worked. And so, in the earlier days, I remember in the 1970s, because I was a kid, and of course I was in the first kids class. And before that, he would throw me in with the adults. But at one point he got brave and said, okay, we'll do a kids class here, when he established a school. And so he would do some forms that, they did during the time when he was at the Chinatown School in Los Angeles with Uncle Bruce. So, which kind of looked a little bit more traditional, right? But then it evolved, and that's part of what Jeet Kune is about, really, is evolution and finding your own path as an individual, if that makes sense.
Yes, it makes sense. I really like because I read your husband book. After I did the interview with him, I read the amazing book, and it's more flexible, right? It's like kind of like if you will, like learning a language, right? Multiple languages. It's almost like, because oftentimes we're like stuck in like when we're learning like a specific language.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes, or like a specific language. Subject that we don't learn other,
right, other styles, other systems, and really, you have to be able to adapt. You definitely have to be able to adapt. I mean, one analogy my father would use is like basketball. If you look at old photos, how people used to play basketball, they would do the granny shoot, right? And then later on, we started evolving to more of an overhand and one-handed approach. And look at Michael Jordan and look at LeBron. You have all these different people that have evolved the game. But can you imagine if we were still doing it the way they did it over 100 years ago? Well, it's the same thing with martial arts. You have to adapt to the times. And then you have to consider too where you live, how you can adapt. If you're a man or a woman, if you are able-bodied or if you are disabled, you have to kind of figure out individually, what's works for you. And it goes back to that wonderful saying that Uncle Bruce had, that man, the creating individual, is more important than any established style or system. And that's a very important quote. But I would say that it's part of the heart of what Jeet Kune is about.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to, how did it feel to be in the presence of Uncle Bruce? You keep calling him.
How did it feel? Well, at the time, I didn't know that he was famous or that he had a following. I didn't know what Green Hornet was, I just knew that he was a really cool guy, and he was at the house a lot, and Dad and him always, were always together. And to me, they reminded me with my adult eyes, like two scientists, just obsessed to find like the latest, greatest thing. And I can remember as a child, Uncle Bruce was over in my dad's, and they were in my father's library. And so the parameter of my dad's library had all these books, all these photos, all these weapons. But in the middle of the library, there was like a weightlifting set. And then one corner was my father's desk. So Uncle Bruce would be working out, doing weights, and then my dad would be taking notes, and they would talk out loud, different concepts and, different theories. And I was too much of a little girl to remember. I just remembered that they were they were multitasking, definitely. And yet Uncle Bruce was really good about being able to take a break and kid around with me and be the sweet uncle that he was. So, I mean, those are the kinds of memories that I have. And yet they would go, once I, left the room, they were right back to, taking notes and, talking about, the nuanced levels of their research,
Right. Thank you so much for the, the image of the story of the book. Because I noticed that in one of his Bruce Lee book, it's like, he read 2,000 books. Because, I'm into, I remember Ron Balicki, your husband, said you guys are into Tony Robbins, right? I'm into personal development, right? And
I love that.
Yeah, I love it too. What do you get into personal development deep or not?
Oh yeah, you know who I love? Have you heard of Jen Sincero?
Mm-hmm.
For a badass. I love her. I'm listening to her Audible books. I also have her regular books as well. But her Jen Sincero, I love her because she's so unorthodox in her approach. But she's like an Anthony Robbins, and so she'll use what I call urban language and talk, and and yet you feel really enlightened when you're listening to her. But it's done on this level that's very organic. So she's an amazing life coach, just like in the same vein as Anthony Robbins. You know, they all have their different approaches. But yeah, I would recommend her to anybody if anybody's out there listening. You know.
Yeah, thank you so much. Wait, do you know the book called? Well, I guess I'm gonna try. Do you know a book called Think and Grow Rich?
What's it called again?
Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, or like you never heard of it?
Yes, I have. Think and Grow Rich. Yeah, I have heard of that. In fact, I think if that's the same book I'm thinking of, it's sitting on my my dresser. My kid bought that for me for Christmas. So he knows I love these kinds of books. You know, I think it's very important for people, any individual, to always feed their mind with the latest, greatest, and even if you may disagree, it doesn't matter. But there's always people that might have insightful things to share. Anything that helps build your body, your mind, body, and spirit. You know, because these are times where we have so much information coming at us, and I do think it's important to be able to block out everything else and to feed oneself. You know. And to be on a personal path of growth. So I commend you for reading these kinds of books.
Oh, thank you so much for that. Yeah, because I'm trying to figure out a pathway to see, because I know that Bruce Lee is actually a spiritual person too, and he reads like spiritual books. But I'm trying to segue where what type of books he reads and what type of you guys read, because I think that you guys are living an amazing life, and I think that, I'm sorry. I think that because people, I never known, how to become successful, where people have a different mindset, society and, school, because I'm a special education, right? I would like to impact the special education because I was labeled special ed, right? And
Were
so,
you?
yeah. And so they said that I have a learning disability until I found out that if I read these books about the brain, like Tony Buzan, I could I think it's ineffective the way that the educational would teach a student how to operate or the brain, and so I would now realize that we are smarter, right? I disagree with the educational system with America.
Right. Well, it's a certain style. It's a certain system, right? But there are many styles and systems. Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that because my own son I have two sons. I have one with autism, and I have another one that was classified with having ADD. But, I already knew first of all, I come from a family of educators, but I'm also aware, just as a martial arts teacher, that everybody learns differently. We're all wired so uniquely. And so sometimes I could teach one way with one individual and find that maybe with another person, if I took a different approach, they learn differently. So, and that's kind of the way I look at my own boys too, when it came down to their own education, and, I would take in, and absorb what other people may say, but I always took notice when there were maybe different perspectives on learning. And so I don't think either one of them are wrong. It's just, gathering what it works best for you, and I commend you. That's awesome that you're doing that. And, it's funny. I don't know if you're familiar with Robert Kiyosaki of Rich Dad.
Yes, I have his book.
Okay.
Matter of fact, because I read so many books and I'm trying to see, I learned how to be able to ask people to get interviewed because I don't have connection. So at first I start out tweeting to best-selling authors, CEOs, for how do they set their goals, right?
Right.
And Robert Kiyosaki is one of my, because I have one of his book. I love him, and
he's written like now 23 books. I actually run with a lot of the same people in his circle, so it's been great. And I like Robert, and his sister too wrote a book, which was interesting because she was a Buddhist nun, right? And but she also wrote her book with Robert's also influence, and I mean, it's incredible, that family. So, but I love Robert Kiyosaki, and he said something very interesting, because I was an okay student, but I love how he noticed a pattern that sometimes that A students end up working for C students, you know, and I have seen that. I mean, I've known a lot of, quote, self-made multimillionaires, and some of them weren't that great at school, right? But they had a different lock on where their path was for whatever reason, a different passion, and then somehow they excelled at that, and some of them created companies and had people that worked for them. And, you know, I love Robert's quadrant, actually, you know, and I really think that's something people need to kind of, you know, if they're open-minded, take a look at it. You know, how do we function when we make money? You know, are we going to continue to be the employee or the self-employed person, or are we going to take a risk and be on the other side of the quadrant, be a business person or be an investor? You know, and there's some truth to it. And I know Richard Branson has his own formula as well. And so it's kind of interesting how people have kind of created their own process, you know, and have been able to identify maybe different roads to success.
Thank you. It sounds like you really relate to me in a way, because, you know, people, you know, the subconscious mind, where if you relate, it's just like you really do understand people. That's the first time I ever like seen in a way, right? Because I would do interviews, and of course I understand people. You know, I let, you know, the people that I interview talk about themselves, because people like to talk about themselves, of course. But this one, this interview that I'm doing with you, like, it totally blew my mind, really.
Yeah, that's cool. You know, I'm just piggybacking on other people that have been gracious to share their knowledge. So, I mean, that's what it is. It's like an echo, you know. It's like a ripple effect, you know. So
I noticed that you really are into business stuff. Are you?
Yeah, I am, and I'm constant. I take the same approach like my father, where I feel like I'm a white belt, and I am there to receive the information, and hopefully will come out of it a black belt in business. You know, I constantly am growing, and I've been so fortunate to meet very impressive people that are leaders themselves in their fields. And so I still feel like I'm on my learning curve, and I apply that particularly right now as a businesswoman in the entertainment field. But like I recently, well, not recently, it was in around 2016, you know, I was invited to the White House, and I didn't know this. Apparently, I'm considered a Filipino-American leader. I didn't know this, but I got an invitation. I have a dear friend of mine named Billy Deck, who, if you ever see him, they call him the mayor of Chicago, but he's an incredible entrepreneur. He's on I think it's the Good Morning Show with Hoda and Kathy Gifford, and you know, he has. He's in the restaurant business, but yet he also is an actor, and also he's an activist, and he was on the Asian American Council or Commission for the White House. And so he sent me an invitation, and it was incredible because I was meeting with all kinds of different leaders from all walks of life, some of them Democrats, some of them you know, Republicans, some of them in between. They were just people just trying to make you know, our world a better place. And so I learn, and you know, and I think that's how you grow, is by, you know, putting yourself in a position to be with people who are also trying to evolve and grow and learn, you know. So it's important.
That's so beautiful. That's so beautiful. Thank you so much for that. As a martial arts teacher, as a woman for martial arts, how, because it's very different aspect of from a guy's standpoint. What is your standpoint for martial arts, as if any woman listening for martial arts?
Oh, that's an interesting question. As a martial arts teacher, or as just watching how the role of women in the martial arts world? You mean both of that, or?
Both.
Both. Okay. Well, first of all, unfortunately, there's a real deficit of female teachers. There are women fighters, you know, out there, but to be a teacher is very unique, and so there's not There's not a whole lot of them worldwide, although they are there. You know, martial arts still is predominantly, male energy. And so I think it's a little different sometimes when I used to travel, because Ron Balicki and I, my husband, when we first got married back in the mid-90s, and we started venturing out to be a team that taught. I mean, it was very unusual for men to be around female energy and for me to teach them. And sometimes they were great and receptive, and sometimes you could tell people just weren't used to that because maybe culturally they didn't come from a background that, where they saw female teachers. But then the interesting thing is I found the more I returned to different countries, they were bringing back their sisters, their moms, their girlfriends, their wives. And they were saying, please come and see this woman. Because I think there's also a misperception among women that women can't do martial arts. And I think they feel like, well, martial arts must mean I have to get in a ring. And well, no, you don't. Martial arts can be something as quiet and as gentle as doing Tai Chi in the morning in a park. Or it can be as something bold and colorful as being an MMA fighter, right? From a more sports kind of perspective. There's all kinds of, different martial arts that people can partake in, particularly women. So I'm hoping that is the year, I'm hoping that we'll see more of this, more women stepping into, that arena and becoming teachers. But also, as a student, you don't have to be a martial arts teacher. You can utilize martial arts more on a spiritual level and on a philosophical level. And I use it all the time in Hollywood. And I'm very lucky that I had a father that was really good about showing me women warriors through the ages. So my father would give me this broad understanding, and this is a man now, right? He wasn't a man that said, no, girls shouldn't be doing martial arts. He really embraced the idea that it was important as a father and as a man to have his daughter be aware of women warriors. So we would get out old books, because you got to remember, I'm of Generation X. There were not a lot of schools that had girls, so, and there weren't role models for me. There just weren't a lot at all. So he would get, introduce all these women warriors, from Joan of Arc, from Boudica, which is a Celtic woman warrior, from Mulan, to all these warriors like Gabriela Silang in the Philippines, to these African women warriors, and he wanted me to understand that women knew how to step up too when the time came. And the other thing I think that's interesting when you study women warriors, women who did martial arts, women generals, women who were leaders throughout the ages of time, and this is why history to me should be taught with martial arts, in my opinion, is women came from a place of love. And I know that sounds like such a contradiction to say love in conjunction with martial arts, but you had to remember in olden times, before we had the technology that we had, almost every culture, if they were being attacked, if you were going to learn how to fight off an invading force, you did it because out of love for your country, or maybe your love for your community, your village, your family, and your own temple, your one's, or yourself, right? And so love has always been your strongest why in understanding martial arts and why to learn it. And if you were to apply that today, for me, I love my children, I love my husband, and everything I do is in the name of making sure I can provide a good life for them. I also think martial arts mentally has prepared me in Hollywood, because I was raised around, quote, a lot of male energy in the martial arts industry. It doesn't intimidate me to be in a room of all men and say I have no problem being called a producer or a director and leading men to create a wonderful project. Does that make sense? Yeah. So martial arts can play a positive role in many facets of life.
Thank you so much. Yeah, a long time ago, before we get into all the detail that you just explained, it's very beautiful that you give the viewer, whoever is watching this, to be able to see a whole bigger picture. I think that's beautiful. for the history, I think most of the time, I think that history, because I'm beginning to love history for what it is, just whether it's my uh, Vietnamese background history, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But I was born in America, so I don't. But
Right.
right, but I think because I used to hate history or social study because it would, I don't like it. School would push it, so I think that's
Yeah.
the reason. How
Sure. I
did you?
think a lot of people do feel that way, and sometimes it's kind of how it's taught too that can make the difference.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and yeah, it's the same thing. Why I love Robert Kiyosaki is he said the same thing. You can't judge people based upon their grades, right, or intelligence. And where if you notice if you place a student if they have a D, and if you place a D student in where they are interested, they'll get an A or a B. They'll do good. I
Yeah.
think that yeah. For how did you guys meet with with you and your husband, Ron Balicki?
Oh, well, my father actually. It's funny. I knew of Ron's existence for probably 10 years because, he started with my father, I think when he was 17 years old. Because my father would do seminars all across the United States, Canada, all throughout the world, in Europe, and everywhere, Asia, South America. And he was one of the stopping places he would always teach at was Chicago, and I had talked about potentially being a police officer at one time, and my father wasn't. It's not that he wasn't happy with that choice, but he wanted me to have a different perspective because this was, and you have to remember, this was right after the LA riots, and he really wanted me to make sure that I knew what I was getting myself into. And so he wanted me to talk to Ron Balicki, his student, because, Ron had been a deputy sheriff for Cook County. And so Ron happened to be in California on a visit, and we talked. And by that time, I had shifted gears anyhow in my interest and decided to stick with going to college and finishing up some of my schooling. And then later on, of course, I became a stunt woman, so which was just as dangerous, right? But it was because of Dad that I met my husband of 22 years now.
Oh, that's so cute. Thank you for
Yeah, right. 2 years.
How does it for you? How does it like you're very multifaceted? I'm very like how did you become a actor, a producer, and a director?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, to me, they're almost kind of one and the same. They're just different expressions of creativity. But my dad's sister, Lee Inosanto, she also used to be known as Lona Nye. That was her stage name for a while in the 1970s. She was an actress. She taught acting, actually. And so she always thought that maybe I should give it a try, since I always loved the arts anyhow. And so she always sort of directed me to some of the best teachers in the country. Like at that time in the late 80s, I was very young, but in the late 80s, early 90s, there was Michael Shortliff, who was responsible for discovering Dustin Hoffman, and he had his part in discovering like Bette Midler and Al Pacino. And he was really more affiliated with Broadway out of New York, and he would come once in a while during breaks to California, to the Burbank area. And so I would, I would be in his classes and take courses from him. So that gave me a real strong foundation in acting. And of course, I studied with other acting teachers as well. And but I struggled because as much as I had great training, Hollywood just didn't have a lot of roles for my type. I'm half Asian. I'm half white. I do have some Spanish ancestry as well, but casting directors just didn't know what to do with me. It wasn't like the way we see it now. I'm happy for young people today because, they're much better about diversity in Hollywood. Because I remember the days when I would go out and audition, and maybe there would be some episode where they wanted to have a 5-liner given to one person of color, and they would audition everybody who was African American, Asian, and Hispanic all against each other for this one tiny little role. And yet they weren't addressing the issue that the writers and the producers weren't, writing material that showed something that reflected the mainstream culture, So it was very frustrating for me, because I loved acting, but Hollywood as a business wasn't opening its doors. And then if you're a woman, it was even worse because there were more roles for men than there were for women. And that's not an opinion. I mean, you could look at the numbers and statistics, and it was, it was just devastating, So, but my in with Hollywood came because of my martial arts ability. And I ended up talking to this one stunt coordinator, and I happened to be on the set because in between breaks, I sometimes had to do extra work, right? And because I wanted to learn the business so much. And I thought this at least keeps me on the set where I can watch how a set is run, and couldn't afford going to, film school because I was at that time a single mom with a child. But he said, on this one particular set, and it was Demolition Man with Sylvester Stallone and Wesley Snipes, actually. A couple of my dad's students were actually on that show. And I watched them. I'm like, I can do all this. I know all this stuff. I know how to do all this. And one of the stunt choreographers, his name was David Lee, goes, why don't you do this? Why are you not out here? You could still be in the Screen Actors Guild and be out here playing. And I'm like, yeah, why don't I do that? And so by that time I had met my husband, we were dating, and the next big thing was I was on the set of Barbed Wire, and we were actually training an actor by the name of Tamora Morrison. Do you know that name? Mm. Watch Star Wars movies, right?
Yeah.
Well, Boba, yeah. Okay, so Boba Fett, you would know, right? So that was Tamora, but we were training him for Barbed Wire, and I guess there was some problems with the choreography, and Ron just happened to call me up in front of all the producers, and so he goes, could you just please run this by the numbers with me? And so I would do the scene like I was Tamora, and the producers all gathered in a circle off to the corner, and little did I know that the role was originally this fight scene with Tamora was written with 2 male bodyguards, and they said, we're willing to change it to a female, and would Diana take on the role? And that was my introduction into stunt work. That was my first big gig. And then the second real big gig was Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And they said, there's this girl out there named Diana Lee Inosanto, and she knows martial arts, and she might be a good stunt double for Sarah Michelle Gellar. Why don't you come and see her? And before I knew it, I was doing Sarah's fight scenes, and we did the presentation with Joss Whedon for 20th Century Fox and Warner Brothers, and the rest was history. I did about half the season, and then I went on to got an invitation to work on Walker, Texas Ranger, and then Face Off with John Woo, and then it just took off, and that inevitably led me to decide, well, I should also try directing and producing, and here I am today.
Holy crap, that was good.
Yeah. Thank you.
I feel like you're welcome. I feel like I was listening to like a SU. I don't know if you know the they call it, where they have the movie The Secret or The Law of Attraction, stuff like that. It's like as if you manifest your dreams, or you have, I don't know what was that your dream, like, because
yeah,
my message. Sorry,
yeah, there wasn't. I mean, I've always known, since I was a little girl, that I wanted to be in the entertainment field, and then I wanted to be a great entertainer. But I realized there's many ways to be a great entertainer. You could do acting, you can do stunt work, you can be the writer, you could be the director, the producer. There's just different ways. Cinematography is another way. It's all part of bringing together a team of people, because it is a collaboration. And but yeah, I mean, what was Nikola Tesla's famous saying? I hope I don't mess it up, but what is energy is, your frequency and vibration, and you have to just do it over and over and over. And the more you do it, you do attract other people to you. And so that kind of did happen for me. You have to just get out there and put yourself out there. And so, yeah, I found my way, just, and the interesting thing, I found my way, even though my dad gave me a lot of my martial arts foundation, I still had to go out there and do the work. Just because, you know, I'm somebody's daughter doesn't mean I get to sit back and it comes to me. I have to put myself out there too as well. So
yeah, thank you so much for letting that people know about that, right? Because I'm all about inspiring people. That's why I do interviews with amazing people. Because you know I don't come up from a background but no connection. I don't have any thing, but I choose to take action on my dreams, right? And as I take action on my dreams, I notice that amazing people like yourself would say yes. Sometimes I would get rejections, but at first it would hurt. But now I'm like okay with it because I at first long time ago I didn't like rejections, but now I'm like okay.
oh, rejection. I know. Trust me, I've been rejected too. Many times. So it happens, you know, but then you just grow for it. You just move on. You have to move on, you know?
Yeah. Before that, I would like to go backtrack. You said you were on the Walker Texas Ranger. Were you?
Yeah. Yeah. Chuck Norris would have me come in and his family, you know, because again, it's a team. They were a team, and they would have me come in and double for any of his guest stars. And so I would just put on a wig. So I know what I look like as a redhead, blonde, curly hair, straight hair. You know, I've done it all. You know?
That's my favorite.
I'm a natural brunette.
Oh, wow. The reason why I asked that because that's one of my favorite shows.
Oh, Walker, really? Yeah, it was pretty amazing how Chuck got that off the ground. You know, from what I understand is, you know, he had this vision of this, you know, hero sort of in Texas, obviously, and he did martial arts, and he pitched it to, I think it was CBS at the time, and he got it off the ground. I mean, kudos to him. That show went on for a very long time, for many, many seasons. So it was amazing that the whole Norris family, because his son was part of it. I think his brother was part, you know. So, and they provided jobs in Texas. You know, it was a great way for Texas to kind of have their foot in the Hollywood door. And, you know, that's the beautiful thing when you decide to be a producer and make a film, because you are an entrepreneur and you are like the CEO, and you are creating jobs and you're creating opportunity, you know?
Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much for that insight that you did. I used to watch his show when I was a kid. Well, there is one of the interview that he did on the because I watched his interview on YouTube. It's like back in the 18 something or something, and he talking about that it's the same thing as you know what you just say about the energy or whatever. It's just that he didn't say in a weird woo-woo way. He said with the you have to have a mental image of what you want, and you have to be persistent of that goal, and you have to, even if obstacle come your way, you have to keep going. I think that's probably that's what I want to ask you when you have this vision, right? And what do you do with all these challenges or the things that delay you, or how do you deal with them and how you keep going?
Well, it's hard because you could have a vision of see, I'm a firm believer that the universe works out the way it's supposed to work out. You just you have your course that you're going to take on your vision, and then sometimes there are obstacles and hiccups along the way, but I look at it like the way almost Robert Kiyosaki looks at it. You learn from it, that you interpret it as though, oh, this is good because what can I learn from this? And there's always something to be learned. Like I'm trying to think. Even sometimes I found when somebody rejected me, which it hurt later on, I would find out, oh, it was good that they couldn't take on this project because maybe something happened with that individual that would have impacted me in a negative way. And so it was better that by moving on and talking to other people, that later on I found the right group to be with, I can't go into specific business specifics, but I cannot tell you how many times that has happened where I was like so disappointed that maybe I didn't get a certain job, only to find out later on that it was this blessing in disguise that I didn't get it, and for the person that did get it, I'm sure there's always a lesson to learn, you know, because even in the most difficult times, where I remember when I was doing my indie film, The Sensei, and I had an investor that pulled out when he said he was going to pull in, and it was such a lesson to me that you can't rely completely on hearsay. You know, just because somebody gives you their word and you've met 2, 3, 4, 5 times, you have to get everything in writing. You know what I mean? You have to really be committed to learning not to make the same mistakes again. And so I've made my mistakes too in Hollywood, but I've also grown from them. And I also had people in the beginning with, like, The Sensei was not your typical quote martial arts movie. It was actually, in all intents and purposes, a drama that had martial arts in the background. And everybody assumed that I was going to do this, you know, action type movie. And I wanted to have a different statement about myself as an artist. And it was during the time that that my well, if you're familiar with the Matthew Shepard case, Matthew Shepard was a young gay man back in the 90s who was brutally murdered because he was gay. And I don't know if you remember that case, but it was a horrible case that really started a dialogue in our country. And for me, as a martial arts teacher, I used to see some martial arts school owners reject having certain students if they knew they were maybe from a different background or different values, like being gay. And because I had seen what had happened with Matthew, I started also learning what generally happens to that population. You know, the high suicide rate among teenagers, how they are more vulnerable to attacks. And I just thought our community has to address this. You know, I know what it's like to be a victim of racism. You know, my mother was white, my father was Asian, and I remember as a little girl not being able, watching my parents not even be able to get service in a restaurant because people rejected our family. So I just felt, as a filmmaker, I wanted to express myself in the Sensei about, what is it? What is it, how we can make our world better and address the issues that are even very difficult for us to talk about. And I'm so glad I did that, because some people rejected it, that whole idea. And then there were other people that opened up this avenue of opportunity, because once the movie came out, I was interfacing with the Matthew Shepard Foundation. I was interfacing with people like John Lewis, who marched with Dr. Martin Luther King, who said, I heard about your movie and I think you're a brave young woman for making this movie. I ended up getting an award in Washington, D.C., where members of Congress were there. I mean, all because I stuck with my vision. And it led me on this path to meet all these amazing people who are brilliant, brilliant forces for good. And for that, I'm forever grateful.
That's a beautiful story, makes me tears.
Oh, thanks.
I feel like, wow, you have a tremendous, I guess you could say that you have seen just you have like a tremendous pain in your life, and you wanted to not only, hold it in, but you actually did something about it, right? And to show people that's. I
really believe no matter what your circumstances are, no matter how bad they are, if you come from a rough, tough neighborhood, and I really believe they are lessons you can learn and you can build upon that. And the other thing too is you will learn compassion, or you will learn how to empathize, have empathy. Like I said, what I saw as being a young biracial little girl growing up, when my parents got married in the 60s, they were married in California, but that was one of the few states in the entire United States that allowed for interracial marriage. And so their marriage was basically against the law in other states. A lot of people don't know that. So it wasn't until 1968-69, a case called Virginia versus Loving, that interracial, the ban against interracial marriage was finally turned over. But you know, just because that ban was turned over didn't mean that people changed right away. So I would still say there was still some stigma left for another 10, 20 years against people that had multiracial families like myself, you know, and now we're living in a better time. But of course, understanding that, of course, I definitely could see how you had to apply that same empathy to people who might be of a different sexual orientation or a different religion, you know, and so I'm all about trying to connect with people.
Yes, thank you so much for your work and for what you contribute for the world for a better.
Thank you.
Because I grew up hating my life because I don't like the way, because back then when I was a kid I was bullied. I hated, you know, school. I would skip because of my friend, but you know, I got kicked out of high school, and then. But the thing is, people don't understand that the day that they kicked me out of high school was the best day of my life. You know, people would say, you know, don't be like your older brother, you know, but they didn't understand. After that, I went to boarding school. I met new friends, new experience. Mm-hmm. Amazing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, that's awesome. You know, that you were able to, you know, find a different path. What is it? I think my dad talked about, and also my husband Ron talks about. It's like when you are forging, you know, a weapon like a sword, you know, it has to go through fire. It has to go through all this different treatment to get it to be, you know, this magnificent, beautiful blade, you know, and sort of like, I guess that could be a metaphor for human life, you know. In fact, are you familiar with the author Malcolm Gladwell?
Oh my God, well, I have his book, but Jesus Christ, you are like embodiment of self-help stuff. Jesus.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So I've read pretty much all his books, but maybe I missed out on one. How many books does he have now? 5, 6. But anyway, one of his books I love, and I recommend it to people out there. It's called David and Goliath. You know, and it talks about different people who had that, what I call the David experience. If you know the story of David and Goliath, right? But you know, he makes the case in his book that even, you know, in a way, tough times helps build character, and I am a firm believer of that. I mean, I've seen that over and over and over. I mean, I go back to even Uncle Bruce and my father. I mean, they both had individual, you know, backgrounds where they both had, you know, tough childhoods, you know, and, you know, Uncle Bruce used to get picked on in Hong Kong because he was a quarter white, you know, and, you know, he was always trying to find his place, you know, in the world. And then all of a sudden he comes back, you know, probably the most famous anchor baby we have in the United States, right? Because he was born in San Francisco, you know, but then his parents, you know, raised him in Hong Kong. And by age 18, he was back in Seattle, Washington. And then he was being picked on because, you know, he was Asian. So, and that made him really think heavily and profoundly about, you know, the human experience. And I just love, you know, that he made this distinction in his head that we are all part of the human race. We are but one family under the heavens, and, you know, under the skies and under the heavens, we are but one family. I'm sure you heard this beautiful quote. And there's so much truth in that, you know, because he saw what it was like to be picked on from different perspectives, to be picked on for being a quarter white, and to be picked on for being part Asian. And I think he realized we have to move beyond that, you know, that we should just be citizens of Earth and be the best citizen of Earth possible. And that kind of philosophy, so, you know, made sense to my father, you know, being a kid from Stockton, California, and being picked on for being Filipino. And, you know, when my grandparents first came to California, I mean, they were greeted with these horrible signs that said, no dogs, no Filipinos, you know, and they had to be governed by the same kinds of, you know, laws that happen for African Americans in the South, you know, same kind of prejudices. And if they wanted to date or in some cases intermarry, they had to go out of state or out of country just to get married, you know. I told one young man the story about how family members who did intermarry with whites, the children couldn't quite interact publicly with each other because back then, the 30s and 40s and 50s, if people knew that you were part Filipino, you could potentially lose out on a job, It was just hard times. And so that built, though, my father's character. My dad had to work in the farms. My grandparents were amazing people. They were actually activists, which a lot of people don't realize, that they were political activists, and they were always trying to make the community better. And my grandfather had helped one of the first unions actually in California for farmers. In fact, my grandfather was such an important figure that when he died back in 1989, Cesar Chavez's people sent representatives to pay respects to my grandfather because he was that important of a figure. So, I can say the same thing for not just the individual, but even families when they've gone through a lot of strife and tribulation. It does help build character, and you grow from it.
Right. Thank you. Wow. So beautiful. That I just like sit here and like listen. I think that for anyone who would listen, that's very inspirational, and that's like insightful not only for me, for others. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Like I said, I'm piggybacking on people that were inspirations, for me. So I've been very blessed and very lucky.
What is your philosophy and principle of Jeet Kune or martial arts?
What is my personal philosophy? As I said earlier, it can have different interpretations, but I think the most important thing is that you're able to adapt and to evolve and not get stuck in one style, one system, but to see things from different perspectives, from different points of view. Like my father put it this way. So here's my cup, right? Let's just pretend it's this beautiful piece of artwork, right? And so you can get one person that says, hey, this person used really bold lines, look how bold the artwork is, And then this other person will have a different perspective and say, oh, but no, look at the interpretation of the color red and the way the light hits it. And isn't it incredible? And then you'll have another person that says, oh, God, the fact that they are using red, are you kidding me? And, so we all tend to kind of look at different perceptions and different perspectives, and you can take that in, and then you kind of have to, as an individual, you have to decide when you're looking at whatever it is in life, how is it that you can make that work for you, or does it work at all? And you move on, And so originally, of course, Jeet Kune was always applied to martial arts, right, in the beginning. So, but honestly, it was just meant to be a word, and it was just meant to just be a process in how you look at something. And how you can apply it to yourself as an individual. Like, for instance, I will say this, like my godfather's art is called Zhenfeng Gung Fu, although people tend to use the term Jeet Kune. But when you think about it, his art, Zhenfeng Gung Fu, really was his form, his Jeet Kune. But he always was open-minded about, don't just copy me, find what works for you. So like he would encourage my dad's own journey. What works for you, Dan? And you always encourage my dad to maybe look and study Filipino martial arts, French Savate, study whatever, Pinja Salat, and just see, are there elements of this that work for you that don't work for you, And then it's the same thing for women. Women might have to apply a whole different strategy of martial arts because they're women and we're built and structured differently. Our circumstances, our locations. So that to me, it's about adoption and evolution and giving your permission to grow and to even change too as well. So
that's where I was gonna say, yeah, thank you so much for that. Yeah, the change part, right? The change part is the hardest part of human being because human beings don't like change, right? If you force someone to change, they won't change. Because I heard this guy named Bob Proctor, who I listen to or look up to, And he's like, if you force them, they won't change. But if you let them change, they will change. Because oftentimes, like you say about your history, about your past, oftentimes people have this uh, program thoughts of generation from their past, and that's and their mindset is very different. Like I come from a background of my mom is a Buddhist, right? And so I have it's like people who are into like I like Vietnamese food. Why do I like Vietnamese food? Because my mom would cook it, but it was programmed into me, right?
Yeah.
Right. But people don't understand. It's like for me, I I still like Buddhists, but I don't associate myself to Buddhists because it's like you're using like Jeet Kune concept, right? It's perception. And I would go out, I would like read books on Hinduism
Yeah.
and well, yeah, it would have it's about open mind, right? And
Yeah.
it's exploring the like. There's so much things that I think that people miss when they.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. That's a great example. And, you know, when you talk about Buddhism, but there's Hinduism, and there's all. My father actually was really good, thank goodness, about, you know, because I came from a diverse background too on the religious end, right? But my dad was so good about making sure that I understood people from different faiths and different religions. And I was very lucky that I had that, because I had friends of mine that would get wigged out if they met somebody that was maybe Muslim or Buddhist, you know, because they were culturally confined to wherever it was they were raised. So if they're not used to it, it's foreign to them. But then sometimes when the teacher is ready, all of a sudden the lesson is there and they become more open-minded to it, you know. I got to tell you a funny story. My dad had did this movie with Burt Reynolds. Are you familiar with Burt Reynolds? He was a big, huge movie star, Smokey and the Bandit, huge movie star in the 80s and 90s, did Deliverance. And he did he started a movie called Sharky's Machine, and he brought in my dad, and it was because of one of my dad's students, Jeff Amata, who's an amazing stunt coordinator, and he's been with my dad for decades. And he's like a big brother to me. And anyway, so my dad was casted to be one of the big heavies in Sharky's Machine, and there's this, oh my God, there's this terrible, violent, horrific scene where my dad even felt funny doing the scene, but his character is called to cut off the fingers of Burt Reynolds' character. Right. Yeah, I know. My dad was like, oh, I don't like this. But anyway, so my dad, you know, does the movie, and I'm 13 years old, and I want to see my dad on the big screen. And so I sneak in with 6 of my friends from school to watch Dad in Sharky's Machine. And I'm watching this movie, and I'm seeing it play out. And actually, I mean, it's for overall pretty good movie, right? But I'm hearing 3 Caucasian or white men behind me, very young. And all of a sudden they started saying, for those of you who are watching me, please forgive my language, but they're saying things like, oh, get that nip, get that chink, get that whatever, out loud. And they're sitting directly behind me. And I'm going, oh my God, they're talking about my father. And they have no idea. It's like they were treating it like this is a real reflection of Asian men. And I got scared about this because as I was watching Sharky's Machine, and this again, you got to remember, this is the 80s now. I realized that there wasn't a balance of showing Asian good guys. It was just all Asian, all the Asians were all playing bad guys. And it was my first recollection that you have to have balance when you're going to have movies out there. You can't just have all Asian, you at least need to cast and show Asians in a positive view to balance out if you're going to have Asian bad guys. Does that make sense? Same thing how they used to cast African Americans, you know, where back in the 80s, it was just frustrating, the kind of images that were coming out. So anyway, these guys are going, get that nip, I mean, every horrible name you can call an Asian American, right? Or just an Asian person, period. And finally, my friend, who, by the way, looks like Mr. T. Do you know who Mr. T is? The A-Team? You ever used to watch the A-Team? Okay, so he's this big African-American guy, you know, awesome. He turns around to them and goes, "Hey, would you guys knock it off?" And they're like, "Hey, what's your problem?" He goes, "That's her father you're talking about." And they all went, "Oh my God, what? Did you just say that's her father on the screen?" And he goes, "Yeah, that's her father on the screen. And you guys have called her this, 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 and this. That you just called her dad that." And they're like, oh my God. And then it just started this whole like chit chatter. And it was interesting because they must have thought about what they sounded like. So, because when after the movie was done, they actually approached me out in the lobby and they go, "So that's your father?" I go, "Yeah, that's my father." And they're like, "We're really sorry that we said this." And one of them said, "I'm from like Oklahoma and we just don't see Asians." And I never thought about it. It never occurred to me that what I was saying was hurtful, you know? And, we started talking and I started making a connection. Remember, I'm only 13. And then I ended up talking about, Uncle Bruce and this and that. And they're like, "Oh my God." But it just dawned on them how programmed they were, because this is what they heard back at home in their rural areas where they were from and wherever in Oklahoma at the time. And, I give them credit. They apologized. But, it was just, it dawned on me the importance of how it's necessary for people to learn from other cultures. And unfortunately, TV and film is a very powerful media. And now we have the internet, which wasn't around when I was a kid, right? So the imagery that we see out there, we have to take in consideration, is there a balance? Are we allowing ourselves to give that person or culture the benefit of the doubt, And so it just taught me the responsibility of how we handle our media. And it also made me realize I might have made an impact on these guys who realized how they sounded like. So,
yeah, thank you for
that story.
Thank you so much for the story. That's a beautiful story of how people perceive things to be. It's why I do interviews. It's how I want to see myself, where my thoughts are programmed, right? It's why so many of us like. We can go back to the red cup that you show. I love red, so I have a different perspective of red, right? I love red things. But there's a thing where, people keep regurgitating, because I hear a lot where adults, where they regurgitate perception as reality. Yet I find out that most adults do not understand what that really means, because I grew up in an Asian background, right? And you have to respect your elders. You can't do crazy things or like laugh or, enjoy. I think that adults tend to stop enjoying their life, as you enjoy your life, you laugh. But most oftentimes, people die at the age of 25 and they get buried at 65. And I go walk around, it's sad. Like, I would go talk to people and I hear the story and it's so sad that they could have become more.
Yeah. Well, I think, that's a whole other loaded conversation about potentiality, being able to harness, our highest self. And then there's some people that are just fine, they don't want to pursue it. I definitely know, I think it's also being aware of, how you're wired, and of course everybody's wired differently, right? And I think it's about giving oneself permission to kind of see what life has to offer, and following your passion, and having faith in oneself too, and being able to drown out the filters and all the people that say, "No, you shouldn't do this," "No, you shouldn't be doing that," or "Should you be doing it?" Or you got to be able to filter all that out and say, this is my life, right? This is the life I've been given. What is what is the potential horizons that, you know, that I can reach, you know, and give yourself the permission, and also, you know, be your best cheerleader, you know, you're having faith in oneself, and getting back up, even if you might fail, because failure is, to me, a very good thing, because you still learn from failure. I don't care what anybody says. It's like, you know, you grow through failure. You grow through rejection. And if I didn't have that, I don't know where I would be today, you know. I had a pretty tough, because I was a young mom. I got married very young, and I had a very short-lived marriage. And from that, I had a son who, at the age of 3, I realized had autism. And back then, they didn't have the kinds of programs that they have now. So for me, I was getting rejected all the time with my kid. Nobody would take us, and I was a single mom, so trying to find help was difficult. And then, of course, there's people's perceptions and all kinds of things. This is before I became a Hollywood stunt woman. So people thought I was crazy to even dare think that I could actually have a career in Hollywood, you know, because they assumed you should have this kind of job because that's probably what is safe for you, you know. And I was daring to dream, you know, and I was careful. I mean, I was very methodical in my approach, you know, because I think if you're going to take risk, it definitely should be a calculated, planned risk. And I would learn and ask questions. And there are some really down times, you know, when you're living in a world that does not only, you know, rejects your child because they're autistic. We have laws now today where you cannot discriminate against children with disabilities, but there were definitely some, I should say, daycares that were definitely discriminating. And then being a single mom, you know, not having, you know, there were some people that didn't want to come near me, and I understood that. But then again, it left the door open to find my beautiful husband. And my husband, who's amazing, was raised in a family where he had his developmentally disabled aunt. And so I always say she's like my earth angel, because she prepared my husband during his formidable years growing up about what it's like to live with somebody who's special needs. So by the time we met through my father and he met my son, it didn't even faze him that my kid had autism. He's like, oh, okay, I've seen this before, because my aunt was disabled, you know? So it's kind of weird how life can work out. You just have to have faith, and you have to have faith in oneself that you can find your way. It does get better, even sometimes in the most darkest times. It's just one moment in time, you know, and you have to keep going forward.
Thank you so much for that. You have a very beautiful mindset and a positive mental attitude toward life. No matter how much what going through your life or challenges or bad time that you have, you always like have this outlook on life.
Yeah, I think it's just about, you know, about faith. You know, you have to have faith. You know.
How do you for people who have fear, whether it's martial arts or life, how do you overcome it for you?
How do you overcome fear? Well, I think you have to acknowledge it. You know, I do. I like, if there are moments, listen, don't think that I don't have moments of fear all the time. I have it all the time. But then I look at fear, it depends on what it is, but I look at fear and I analyze, I ask, okay, what is it that I am exactly fearing? You know, what is it? You know, and I look at it and then I analyze and I go, how, because the real battlefield is here, right? Really, the greatest battlefield is in here. If you can control this, if you can focus, you know, then that's half the battle, in my opinion. It's not what's out here; it's what's in here. You know, we are capable of great things. So one of the things, okay, so I'll give you an example. So when the Great Recession happened, I didn't understand what was happening completely, but because I could see that things were changing in Hollywood, and I was terrified. You know, a lot of people were. I had friends of mine that were losing homes, people were losing jobs, work was going out of the country, and I was fearful. But either you can roll up in a ball, which some people do, or you can say, what can I learn from this? Where can I gain more information to make my situation better? So it set me on a course to get to know people. And the good thing about the Great Recession is I started noticing the people that seemed to have it together. And this is where I came to understand Robert Kiyosaki and other people from that same circle. And so I started, for instance, learning more about real estate investing and cash flow. I didn't understand this, and I realized that was a weak area for me, not understanding how money works. That's just one area, you know. Fear. There was a time when I was a single mother, and here I am with this autistic child, and I feared, well, maybe there is nobody there for me, you know, who, you know, I could hear myself thinking this thought, who would want to love me? I'm a single mom, and I have an autistic child. You know, I can understand maybe wanting to date me for a little while, but to actually want to have a harmonious life with me. And then I thought, you know what? It doesn't matter. I'm going to focus, because my, you know, having another person in my life is not the only way to be happy. I can still have my own path and be happy and have a fruitful life as a single mom. And, you know, marrying somebody isn't necessarily end all be all of happiness. You know, I can be fruitful in my quest to grow as an individual. And I was reading a lot of self-help books back then. And I would grow by reading books. I believe it's important to feed your mind with knowledge. And I would look at people that I grew inspiration, people like Oprah Winfrey, you know, who I thought was amazing. And I just had faith. And it was just by chance that it just so happened that, you know, Ron and I came together and we clicked. We just really clicked. And I knew that somehow we could live a harmonious life. And, you know, we've been together for 20 years, which is really unheard of in Hollywood. It really is. Actually, I think that's kind of unheard of right now in the mainstream from what I hear from friends. So, because he's my best friend, as well as not just, you know, my husband, who literally is my dear friend. So but that was another kind of fear. And so it's just learning to give yourself permission and think that some way you can just wait, and somehow life will provide you some answers. And once it does, don't be afraid. Get on with, you know, jump on board, because you might find it leads you to the roads you need to get out of this, whatever place it is that you fear. Does that make sense?
That's a very powerful story. And my God, you're a very courageous woman.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. Because, you know, so many of, you know, that must be tough spot for, you know, as a single mother to take care of, you know, your autism, you know, son.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But today he's doing great. In fact, he just won. He was just in the Summer Games for the Special Olympics and won a gold medal. You know, I mean, he's come so far, and I'm so encouraged now by you know, the advancements in programs, and now we as a society can talk about, you know, people with different challenges and disabilities, and realize that maybe they're just a challenge, and that's just it. You can, you know, grow from it. And now we're working on a children's book together that kind of talks about what we went through as a family, as a mother and son, you know, dealing with autism. And you know, there's just all kinds of different mountains to climb, you know.
Yeah.
But once you get to the top, the view is quite magnificent.
No, thank you so much for that. Yeah, that's what I was gonna ask you, because you have like all these amazing, well, of course, the bad time and the good time jumbled together, right? And I was like, because I was gonna ask you, I was like, whoa, are you gonna write a book? And then you're like, yeah, you're gonna write a children's book. Okay.
You're right. I'm actually working on 2 books. So I'm working on a children's book with my son. Mm-hmm. And then I'm working on a book about my, in fact, about three quarters of the way through it, about my father. I am sure you heard I'm producing a movie about my dad. It's called Way of the Cowboy. and when he worked with the Dallas Cowboys in the late 1970s. And so I'm writing, I guess you can call it the companion piece, you know, or it's the supplemental information that it wouldn't be in the movie. But, you know, because a lot of times when you have a movie, you can't put every bit of information in a 2-hour platform. It's just impossible. So that's where books can provide some of that understanding of, what we went through during that time period. So.
No,
Yeah.
thank you so much for that. Because I do book reviews. If you ever want to, do that.
Oh, sure.
Yeah,
See?
and
So. See, there's some fear right there, but I'm going to work through it.
Thank you so much for being fun. My God, this is the amazing interview I ever experienced. What is it for you? How do you see your definition of winning?
Of women?
No, winning.
Winning. Oh, okay, winning. Okay, my definition of winning. Oh, wow, that's a profound question. I guess for winning, gosh, I mean, for me, it's just being happy. Oh my gosh, it's just being happy and knowing that I can love and that I have, my trusted circle of people that have been there for me and love me back. I mean, that to me is really winning. I mean, I know some people might say, oh, it's, having things and material things, and those are nice. I've worked my way to having those things, but at the end of the day, it's also about creating positive memories and trying to remind myself to be in the present and knowing what I have and being thankful. I always, in my mind, even when I'm taking a walk, I look up and I'll look at a tree and I see, I notice the sky and the sun and the leaves, and I'm just like, and I'm in my head, I'm always saying thank you, to the universe that I get to even notice that moment, because a lot of times we're so busy going, get the dinner running, get to bed, get in your car, drive to work, all those things, and sometimes we need to take a moment to just stop and see, the world that we live in. There is a lot of beauty. We hear terrible things all the time on the news and on the internet, but there's also a lot of beauty in this world. If you really look strongly, it's there,
Yeah,
So
thank
that's
you.
winning.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that one is beautiful because, I have interviewed so many amazing people who I look up to, or people who have helped me along the way. At first I didn't know how to do an interview because my perception of interview is like freaking a job, right? But no, it's
That's good. You've got to read Jen Sincero's "You Are a Badass" books, because she talks about that in the beginning of her career as a life coach. She's like, in the beginning, her trying to be a life coach, and trying to go through those learning blocks, So yeah, that's cool.
because I think that so often we don't go for our dreams, or because we're stuck in our past, and the present, like you said, you were present at your moment, right? Because I think that the present is the most powerful, right? That's where you create the life that you want, or happiness. It's not by dwelling on the past. It's not by looking into the future. It's the present.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
As I hear you talk, your happiness is also with your family, right? Because a lot of time because the reason why I ask these questions is because I want to disrupt a core value that people have. People, like you said, things, and people, try to get things.
And when I say family too, I'm talking about my friends too, and my students. I look at them all as part of an extension of my family. So even if you come from a traumatic background, like it's mom, I'm on live right now. My mother-in-law just came in live. My mother-in-law lives with us. She's a hoot. Anyway, that's Ron's mom. Anyway, what was I going to say? Oh yeah, so even if you come from an abusive background or a troubling neighborhood, you can always build your own families. And I think that's another thing too, because you want to be in a positive circle of people,
Yes.
and have a winning situation.
Yes, thank you. What does success look like for you?
What does success look like? You kind of in the same vein as winning. Success. I mean, it's just giving myself permission to try new things and to go forward, even if I might be afraid. That's really important to me. I remember early in my career, I don't know why, I saw myself. I did a little bit of psychology here, but I saw myself as an old woman. And I asked myself the question, it's kind of a little game. I asked myself the question, if I didn't try to pursue my dreams, what would I feel in the future as an old woman? And that answer came back as unfulfilled. Like I would have regretted not trying, not knowing what could have been if I didn't try. And I realized I didn't want that experience when when that day comes, when I'm, an old woman in my final season of life, is that I wanted to not be able to look at my life with no regrets and say, I did my best, I tried, and I really went after my passion. So.
Right. Thank you so much for that. That's a very good message for whoever is listening. That's what my message is about. Because I don't want to look at the end of my life and regret the things that I didn't do for people, for contribution for the world, right? Because oftentimes we your family want you to do this certain thing, but
Right.
you want to forge your path, right? Because
Yeah.
if you don't forge your path, you feel like this icky feeling that you didn't do it.
Yeah, that question mark in your head, like, God, if I only had just taken this risk, this one risk, maybe this course would have been different for me. Maybe life would have been different. And I learned from listening to other people, because there's nothing more telling than when you listen to somebody who is an older person and they say, God, I wish I would have done this, when I was younger, and I think it's just taking those calculated risks, and, that's important, in giving yourself permission. That's why I wanted to see, what it would be possible. Would it be possible to work as a stunt woman, or to direct, or to produce, and see what it feels like, the feeling I would get from it, and I'm glad I did. It's I think about it in those early days when I wasn't sure. I mean, gosh, I think of all the amazing people I've met. I mean, seriously, I've met some amazing people. Like I said, one of the highlights of my career was going to the White House. I mean, who gets to do that, or meeting people who are movers and shakers of our world, that are trying to make the world a better place. I just feel very fortunate.
Yeah, thank you. That's a message. That's a powerful message for people, whether they're in martial arts or who's trying to achieve their dream. If you take that first step, you have no idea. Because I have no idea that if I keep taking the step of interviewing people like just as yourself, I have no idea that things would amazing would unfold. Right? It would it still blow my mind today. Like how awesome that is. Right?
Yeah, no. And you think about it, what you're doing is no different from like what Oprah Winfrey did in her early days. You're interviewing people and you're being a vessel for good, because the more you can be that vessel to help bridge new ideas and what other different people's experiences of life, people get to grow. You get to grow exponentially, it's like compound interest. You grow, So it's very important, and that's why I'm a huge believer on constantly reading books, reading magazines, listening to different people like your show, to grow, to listen to people, because all of a sudden it might trigger a new thought, a new thing that can change somebody forever.
Right. Your thoughts, the way that you think. That's how I got into personal development of this guy, Les Brown. he said you gotta listen to positive messages. You gotta read inspirational books. You gotta like intake information that will help you along the way. It's like
yeah, Uncle Bruce was all about that when he was alive, all the time, all the time. It's really important. And Jun Rhee, do you know who Jun Rhee is? He's the father of Taekwondo. He just recently passed, but he wrote a book called Bruce Lee and Me, and he actually has, I love his book because he actually has, well, first of all, Jun Rhee himself is an amazing, extraordinary human being, and he literally died last month, but he was dear friends with Uncle Bruce, and he lived on the East Coast, and oh my gosh, I mean, he was friends with people that in like several presidents since going back to the, I believe it was the early 70s, late 60s. I mean, he's known every single president. He's known almost every single generation of Congress people that came and studied martial arts. But he wrote a book called Bruce Lee and Me, and he has these old, he posted these wonderful letters that Uncle Bruce wrote to him. And you could see Uncle Bruce kind of trying to figure things out for himself too, as well. It was really insightful to see. It's almost like going back in time and seeing Uncle Bruce trying to decide and give himself permission, and also it suggests his struggles too, and yet he was overcoming it, and you can see that in his letters. It's a great book. I recommend it to people who are watching. It's a great supplemental book for like his other books that he wrote, and you should definitely check it out.
Oh, thank you for all the recommendations.
I know, right? I should have a little list. It's, I should have my own like book club, my Audible book club.
Yeah. What for those people? Because also I'm here when I do interviews. I'm not just doing it for myself or people. Well, I am doing it for you, and I'm doing it for you. I'm doing it for me, and I'm doing it for everyone. But I'm here also to solve a problem, right? For you as an actor, a producer, a director, if anyone who want to become an actor or producer or director, where can they begin to learn all those things that you have?
Well, to be an actor, and it depends. You can always be an actor, because there's plenty of plays and stage. But to be an actor in this Hollywood business, now that's different. That's unique, because sometimes you can have the most extraordinary actors and they never make it in this business, because Hollywood, I've come to learn, is about casting for certain looks. It's literally, when they say a role, it's a role, right? So they cast by almost like, I don't want to say stereotypes, but they cast by an image, and you just don't know whether or not, if you can make it or not, because it is competitive. I'm not going to lie about it. However, Hollywood today is elusive. Like, I always laugh when I hear this term, you Hollywood types. Oh, Hollywood. But I'm like going, no, you don't understand. Hollywood is now spread thin. It's now Hong Kong. It's China. It's Indonesia. Hollywood is what? It's Europe now. I mean, 60 to 70% of distribution depends on the international market. It used to be the reverse. Now it's international. So if you're an actor, you can love it, but you're going to have to find a way to interface and to network with different filmmakers. But the lucky thing is you don't have to necessarily come to Hollywood. You can go to New York. Business doing films in New York, North Carolina, Louisiana. I know friends of mine that are working out of Texas. It's so elusive now. So there's the art and the craft of being an actor, and doing plays, whether it's Shakespeare or, I don't know, going to London and getting hooked up with a theater group there. And then there's the business of it. And that's a little tricky, Now there are different pathways. Like, I know people who do improv who excel. Some people do, have been able to utilize a certain forte. So it could be martial arts. I have friends that broke into Hollywood because they were great martial artists, and they ended up doing movies, but they were doing it in Hong Kong and Thailand. So it's very elusive. It's not just one way, but there are, because of technology, you have Casting Frontier. You do have now agencies are starting to have, quote, non-union departments. So now you don't have to necessarily be part of a union to get into the business. There are people that they do get together with friends and they make their own movies and put them in film festivals. Although that's a very tough route. So there's not just one way, but these are many ways now. So that's a good thing, and yet it may be probably a confusing thing, but nonetheless, these are some of the new ways now I'm finding that people have entered the industry.
Okay, thank you. It's almost like the same thing as there isn't one way to become successful in life, right?
Correct.
It's like where people push you into going to school or college, and they say, this is the way and this is how you become successful, right?
Right. Oh yeah. I think in some ways it's easier now, but it's also more competitive, but it's easier now, and technology allows us to be much closer to doing that too,
Yeah, that's why I love technology. Can be bad and good at the same time, right? Because I would notice people would distract on Facebook and they're not doing their dreams, or it would be because I believe that social media is a very powerful platform to market your products or service.
I know people who've gotten to start doing what you're doing. They have shows up on YouTube now, and now they have a TV gig. I cannot tell you how many times I've seen that scenario, or they have a webisode. I mean, that's one beauty of the internet, So, that's a good thing. Much more easier than when I was younger.
Yeah, yeah. Where can we find you on your social media, or where can we find you?
Sure. Well, you can go to www.DianaLeeInosanto.com, which is my basic website, although I haven't updated in a while. But I am active on Twitter. I'm active on Facebook. I'm starting to get a little bit more active on Instagram. Let's see, where else can you find me? It's so hard because there's a show I'm supposed to be on and I'm not allowed to talk about it. But just look out for me. IMDb, you kind of get to stay current about some of the projects I've worked on. IMDb.com, which stands for the International Movie Database, kind of gives the layout of, the things I've been involved in and things that are coming up. So yeah, those are kind of like the different ways, people can find me and say hello and, kind of check me out.
Okay, thank you so much. One last question before we go.
Sure.
This is amazing, gift. This is I don't know, heaven.
But look what you're doing. This is incredible. This is wonderful. So I'm imagining in 10 years you'll be on a set, who knows, you'll, be on some correspondent, interviewing people.
How for those who, because for me, I'm also a martial artist, but I kind of have tough time with being a martial artist, because back then when I was a kid, I would go to kung fu school and juggle with school, but I think that one of the a couple instructor or people at the kung fu school, they didn't understand what I was dealing with or my struggle, because I did burn out. I was burned out, and I have to because I would I didn't have any money to pay the school, so the social worker would have to pay for the kung fu school.
Right.
So, but at the time I didn't. I would not go, so it would cause trouble. So I would ask the seafood.
Well, there's different ways to learning. So you were asking about what are different ways to learn martial arts? Different roads.
Well, no, I mean how do we practice effectively?
I can tell you what helps, or I can only tell you if you were when you probably talk to Ron, having partners, getting a partner, finding a friend that kind of shares the same interests is one way. I am a believer in workshops. I mean, because my dad does them. He's done them for decades around the world of attending seminars, because sometimes you will meet other people. And all of a sudden you strike a chord with them. So think of it like a yoga retreat, right? So there's so many ways you can learn martial arts. So you can get a partner and learn that way, because you do have to have some application to it. Do you know what I mean? You have to feel other people's energy, but you also want to be with people you trust and who aren't going to abuse it. Because I've seen those scenarios, and those are terrible scenarios when people start putting their ego into it, and before you know it, they're like taking cheap shots at you, right? But you want to find a responsible partner. And so how do you find a responsible partner? Well, like I said, you can do martial arts workshops or seminars. There's always some instructor that maybe you might admire and respect that might say, yeah, you know, come and see us. And it's a little bit more friendlier for your checkbook or on your account. Sometimes you can find amazing instructors through the college system. I cannot tell you how many of my dad's students teach out of universities or junior colleges. You know, that's not a bad way to find somebody, or combining some measure of both those ways. And then of course there's the traditional route where people do attend a school and just make monthly payments. So there's all kinds of ways to doing it. I'm also thinking there is private instruction, which is another way. At least you can give yourself, you know, maybe, you know, some lessons. Like I know people that maybe could afford maybe only 6 lessons, and then they kind of work it out with somebody or trying a partner that they can feel safe with. And it is important that you find a partner that is safe. So those are all the different ways to learn. There's never just one way. And then also there are different arts that, you know, how do I say, I love Muay Thai because it's a very simple, but it's a very methodical art. And in that way you can learn individually. You can be hitting the bag or kicking the bag until you can come and circle back around to find another seminar or workshop. I mean, but you know, having some regularity is important, and being on to create some level of intervals. You know, when my husband's away, sometimes I have to work out on my bag, my kick bag, and or I have a dummy that I work on. But it's interesting. At some point, it becomes like bike riding. You know, because when you find it, you do have to kind of have some maintenance and keep it up. But there are different ways to being able to hone your craft. So I don't know if that helps.
Oh, but yeah, it's helped. Thank you so much. That gives me like a whole range of ideas.
Yeah, because some people think you had to just go to a martial arts school, and I'm saying no, that's not necessarily true. You know, there are other ways to approach it. You know.
Do you have like a wooden dummy at your house? Because wooden dummy is one of my favorite go-to like tools.
I do. We do have a wooden dummy, although it's at my friend's school, and then I have a plastic one, but for just to learning placement. And then I have a kicking bag or kicking shield. So there's different ways, you know. My dad, he would find creative ways. Like he wanted to work, how do I say this? He would tie up a stick to a tree, and then he would practice like Filipino martial arts, and it became more alive. So there are ways, and that's where ingenuity comes in, right? Creating ways where you can do your training. My father used to train Randy White for the Dallas Cowboys, who ended up using a lot of martial arts in his game. And during his off time from the Cowboys, he, during the off season, would just hit sticks, his trees on his farmland, training right hand and right side, left side, and working right brain, left brain. I mean, all those little things make a difference.
Wow. You just mentioned the brain part. Okay. It seems like you know about the brain then. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So I was thinking just now because I did want to ask you for this question. Did you guys do like condition? Because, you know, Kung Fu would have like, you know, condition for the farms or stuff like that.
And there's many forms of conditioning. It depends on what you want to do. But that's why I personally love Muay Thai. Just the conditioning alone. They used to apply Muay Thai to the Dallas Cowboys for their conditioning, because if you can kick out those, you know, the type of kicks that they're doing in Muay Thai, where just the structure of how you're in the alignment, oh my gosh, your cardio is up. And can you imagine that this is what they used in the NFL for the Dallas Cowboys and for other teams later on that followed. So there are different ways to promote conditioning. Okay, so yeah, it's also very important. It's part of it.
Yes, thank you so much for your time. And thank you so much for your time.
Yes, amazing. Thank you. Yeah. I had a blast. Woo! All right, everybody. So signing off. So nice. Thank you. So I'll see you on a future set in the future, okay? I just see big things happening for you.
Okay, thank you. Subscribe to my channel. I'll see you.
Take care. See you. Bye.